Cannibalism in humans either occurs as a last resort to sustain oneself, like in many survival scenarios, or premeditated murder that can be due to mental illness. Leonardo Cianciulli was an Italian serial killer in the 1930s and 40s who murdered 3 women and turned their bodies not only into pastries but also as soap. In 1939, the superstitious Leonardo learned that her eldest son and favorite child Giuseppe was going to join the Royal Italian Army in preparation for the Second World War. She was determined to protect him at all costs, and came to the conclusion that his safety required human sacrifices. Leonardo found her victims in 3 neighbors. The first of her victims, Faustina Setti, was a lifelong spinster who had come to her for help in finding a husband. She offered to help, but in one condition, that Faustina would write post-dated letters to relatives and friends, to tell them that she was traveling and that everything was fine. Faustina did not question her, both living in a very superstitious village and convinced that this was part of some traditional ritual. When Faustina came to visit Leonardo one last time, Leonardo killed her with an axe and dragged the body into a closet. She cut into 9 parts and its blood was gathered into a basin. She threw the pieces into a pot, added 7 kilos of caustic soda to make soap, and stirred the mixture until the pieces dissolved in a thick, dark mush poured into several buckets, and emptied in a nearby septic tank. As for the blood, she waited until it coagulated, dried it in the oven, ground it and mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk and eggs, as well as a bit of margarine, kneading all the ingredients baking cakes. As part of her so-called sacrificial ritual, she gifted the soap and served the cakes to people who came to visit her, though her son, Giuseppe, also ate them. Some sources also record that Leonardo apparently received Faustina's life savings as payment for her alleged services to find her a husband. Francesca Soavi was Leonardo's second victim, who she helped find a job at a school for girls. Like Faustina, Francesca was persuaded to write post-dated letters to be sent to friends, detailing her plans of traveling. Francesca then came to visit with Leonardo before her departure. She was given drugged wine and then killed with an axe. Francesca's body was given the same treatment as Faustina's, baking pastries and making soap. Leonardo's third and final victim was the widow Virginia Cacioppo, whom Leonardo claimed to have found work as a secretary in Florence. As with the other 2 women, she was instructed not to tell a single person where she was going, and write post-dated letters. The pattern to the murder was the same as the first 2, however, Virginia's body was melted as she was a rather obese lady. According to Leonardo's statement, Virginia's flesh was fat and white. When it had melted she added a bottle of cologne, and after a long time on the boil, was able to make very creamy soap. She generously gave bars to neighbors and acquaintances. The cakes, too, were superior than her last 2 victims, with Leonardo noting that it matched Virginia's really sweet personality. From Virginia, Leonardo reportedly received 50,000 lire, assorted jewels and public bonds. She even sold all the victims' clothing and shoes. Virginia's sister-in-law, Albertina Fonti, grew suspicious of her sudden disappearance, and had last seen her entering Leonardo's house. She reported her fears to the superintendent of police, who opened an investigation and soon arrested Leonardo. She did not confess to the murders until they believed that her son, Giuseppe Pansardi, was her accomplice in the crime. She quickly confessed to the murders, providing detailed accounts of what she had done, to save her son from any blame. Leonardo was tried for murder but remained unrepentant, going so far as to meticulously detail her cooking methods while on the stand. She was found guilty of her crimes and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a criminal asylum. She died of cerebral apoplexy on October 15, 1970. A number of artifacts from the case, including the pot in which the victims were boiled, are on display at the Criminological Museum in Rome. Catherine Mary Knight, born October 1955, is an Australian murderer and the first woman in the country's history to be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. She was convicted for the murder of her partner, John Charles Thomas Price, in February 2000, whom she stabbed to death, skinned him, and then put his skin on a meat hook. She then cooked his head and parts of his body with the intention of feeding them to Price's children, but was stopped by police. At the posting of this video, she is currently imprisoned in New South Wales. Catherine Knight was born and raised in an unconventional and dysfunctional family environment. Catherine is remembered by high school classmates as a bully who stood over smaller children. Upon leaving school at 15, without having learned to read or write, she gained employment as a cutter in a clothing factory. 12 months later, she left to start what she referred to as her dream job, at the local slaughterhouse cutting up organs. There she was quickly promoted to boning, which required strength atypical of girls her age, and was given her own set of industrial-strength butcher's knives. At home, the knives were hung over her bed so, as Knight said, that they would always be handy if needed, a habit she continued until her incarceration. In 1995, Knight began an affair with John Charles Thomas Price, a father of 3 children. Price was well aware of Knight's violent reputation as she moved into his house. Knight and Price fought over his refusal to marry her in 1998. A few months later, after she intentionally lost him his job, the fighting became even more frequent, and most of his friends would no longer have anything to do with him while they remained together. In February of 2000, a series of assaults on Price culminated in a restraining order, in an attempt to keep her away from both himself and his children. That afternoon, Price told his new co-workers that if he did not come to work the next day, it would be because Knight had murdered him. Despite their pleas that Price should not return home, he stated that he was afraid Knight would kill his children if he did not. Price arrived home to find that Knight, although not there herself, had sent the children away for a sleepover at a friend's house. He then spent the evening with his neighbors before returning home and going to bed at 11 p.m. At 6 a.m. the next day, a neighbor became concerned that Price's car was still in the driveway, and when he did not arrive at work, his employer sent a worker to see what was wrong. Breaking down the back door, police found Price's body, with Knight comatose from taking a large number of pills. She had stabbed Price with a butcher's knife while he was sleeping. According to the blood evidence, he awoke and tried to turn the light on before attempting to escape while Knight chased him through the house. He managed to open the front door and get outside, but he either stumbled back inside or was dragged back into the hallway, where he finally died after bleeding out. Later, Knight went into Aberdeen and withdrew $1,000 from Price's account at an ATM. Price's autopsy revealed that he had been stabbed at least 37 times, in both the front and back of his body, with many of the wounds extending into vital organs. Several hours after Price had died, Knight skinned him and hung the skin from a meat hook on the archway of a door to the lounge room. She then decapitated Price and cooked parts of his body, serving up the meat with baked potato, various vegetables, and gravy. Then she placed 2 settings at the dinner table, along with notes beside each plate, each having the name of one of Price's children. It was evident that she was preparing to serve his body parts to his children as a final revenge. A third meal was thrown on the back lawn for unknown reasons, and it is speculated that Knight had attempted to eat it but could not stomach her own cooking. This has been put forward in support of her claim that she has no memory of the crime. Price's head was found in a pot with vegetables. Sometime later, Knight arranged the skinned body with the left arm draped over an empty soft drink bottle with the legs crossed, in an attempt to mock the deceased. Knight had left a poorly written note on top of a photograph of Price, blood-stained and covered with small pieces of his flesh. As Knight was partially out cold when authorities arrived, she was easily arrested at the crime scene. Knight's initial offer to plead guilty to manslaughter was rejected, and she was arraigned on March 2, 2001, on the charge of murdering Price. No reason has ever been given for the guilty plea, and despite giving it, Knight still refused to accept responsibility for her actions. At the sentencing hearing, Knight's lawyers requested that she be excused to avoid hearing some of the facts, but the application was refused. When forensic pathologist Dr. Timothy Lyons described the skinning and decapitation, Knight became hysterical and had to be sedated. In June 2006, Knight appealed the life sentence, arguing that a penalty of life in prison without possibility of parole was too severe, simply because she skinned and cannibalized a father of 3. But the vote was swift, and her appeal was dismissed by the justices.